Hi, I'm Gail.
Hi, I'm Catherine. Welcome to Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined, our award-winning weekly podcast featuring interviews with women ages 70 to 110. Our sponsor, Production Plus, is an expert in crafting visuals that not only attract attention, but also elevate every moment. From custom printed graphics and scenic designs, they know how to make any event a visual masterpiece.
And today we are so happy to have with us an advocate for women aging, Jane Fleishman. And Jane, welcome to Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Jane. So are we. I want to thank Deborah Robin for introducing you to us. And as a certified sexuality educator, Jane works with people living in senior communities, and she educates them on taboo topics such as intimacy, desire, sexual health, abuse, and consent. An accomplished educator, writer, program developer, and researcher, Jane received a PhD in Human Sexuality from the Widener University Center for Human Sexuality Studies at the age of 62. Jane specializes in training, writing, consulting for organizations, couples, and individuals, and policy review related to all aspects of sexuality for older adults. Her curious nature has led her to research older adults who are in same-sex relationships. And Jane is the author of Stonewall Generation, LGBTQ Elders on Sex, Activism, and Aging, a Nautilus Award winner and Kirkus Review starred selection. And Jane's TEDx Talk, Is It Okay for Grandma to Have Sex?, has received over 96,000 views. So Jane, as I listened to your TEDx talk, and as an older adult, I was mortified that there's a widespread lack of acceptance over older adults having sex and intimate relationships and longings and desire and connection and all of that. And so this area doesn't get enough attention, does it?
Not at all.
Yeah. And so since the TEDx talk, which I believe was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was 2018.
Mm-hmm. Have there been any policy changes? What's changed?
So, Gail, you have to start from how change is made, okay? Because you can't start with policies. I can count for you on one hand how many policies there are in senior living residences that are appropriately discussing sexuality, not the ones about inappropriate sexual behavior. I'm talking about what I call sexual wellness or sexual health. You know, as a sexuality educator, I walk into many different communities, and it's palpable for me what the kind of cultural norm is. If it's sort of taboo for people to be walking, holding hands, or if I hear stories from the staff or the executives about someone was in someone else's room last night when they shouldn't have been, who's telling who should do what? So there's this sort of layer below policy that is the culture that is around us and the discussions. And I have found that for many of the people who work in senior living residences who have not had enough training in the sexual wellness of older adults, if they come upon two people having sex in one of their apartments, they have to make a decision in a nanosecond like that. What do I do? And there's a famous quote from someone at the Hebrew home in Bronxville, which had, by the way, the very first sexual wellness policy in the country of any senior living community. And the director said to the staff person, when the staff person said, what do I do? The director rightly, I think, said, close the door and walk back out in the hall. You get what I'm saying, Gail? With the understanding that it's not up to a staff member to decide. It's up to those two individuals to decide. Or if they're lucky, maybe 3 individuals. We don't know. I don't want to determine what their relationship status would be. However, when we're in a community that is being paid for by the family or by the individual, families often get nervous, worried. They think maybe there's a way in which mom or dad is having sex with the wrong person. Maybe they're married to someone who they're not having sex with, or you can imagine. And so a bit of what I think of as paternalism occurs, particularly because people are worried and they worry about financial issues and legal issues, etc. But sex is going on in senior living communities, and it's happening. And what I believe is my mission in this career that I have just begun about 10 years ago is to promote the sexual wellness of older adults, and particularly those in marginalized communities and those in senior living or communal communities. I'm having a lot of fun doing this, but I can't say that I've been very successful at creating policy. I have been successful in changing attitudes, and attitudes become conversations, and conversations become policy. That's where I see the link from your question. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I shouldn't have been surprised, although I have to admit that I was somewhat. Gail and I learned recently when we were talking with leaders in a senior living facility that there's a special interest group of talking about same-sex relationships. And so can you talk about that a little bit also?
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. You know, I did my doctoral research on older adults and same-sex relationships. Published in the Journal of Homosexuality, which is a very well-respected journal. And I was so pleased to have my dissertation published because, well, you know what it's like. You can't really cite a dissertation until it's been published in a peer-reviewed journal. And what I found among older adults in what I called same-sex or really same-gender relationships, people who were in what we think of as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer relationships. They didn't have to identify as such for my research. They just had to be in a relationship with someone of the same sex or same gender. And what I found was that I was looking at the variables that were associated with sexual satisfaction, because they're different if you are in a non-heterosexual relationship. So, for instance, there's one really important variable that I was looking at around this term internalized homophobia. How the world perceives homosexuals is how you have taken it inside. That's that internalization. So I'll ask you two, what do you think? Do you think this group of, I was looking at people 60 to 75 years old. So they're right within your age group. About half of the people in my study population were identified as women. About half as men, and then a very small percentage as either non-binary or trans. Would you say that this group, remember, this is the group that lived through a lot of repression and real oppression, had really high internalized homophobia, middle, or not so high? What would you think?
High.
I thought the same. You too, Gil? I thought it was going to be high also. This is one of the great things about me becoming a researcher. I had all these preconceived notions that went kerflooey right out the window. This group, Catherine, had very, very low internalized homophobia. And that is to say, the ways in which they perceive themselves was very positive. They didn't take on the trappings. Another variable I looked at was resilience. How well do they get up in the morning? You know, how do they repel those forces against them? How do they continue when things look bad? They had very, very high resilience. Again, it was a quantitative analysis. I couldn't ask people why they said that, but my assumption is that they said that it was high because they had been through a lot and they knew how to fight the fight, etc. Another variable I looked at was relationship satisfaction. That was also pretty high. each one of those were correlated, or in statistical terms, they were associated with each other. But relationship satisfaction was a predictor of sexual satisfaction for these older LGBTQ folks. So that was interesting. But what was most interesting was, and what really has kind of excited me about my work, it's the good and the bad, was their sexual satisfaction was quite low. So I think there's a lot of room for growth for a sexuality educator who's interested in talking to older people about sex, because perhaps I can do some good in teaching them about what it means to find desire later on in life, the longing that we all have for intimacy, and what it would mean to have a sexual relationship that would be satisfying. And so I have found that this group is a very interesting group to study, and they're very welcoming to my work. They're very excited. They want to hear from me. But here's the problem. We're here taping this interview in the beginning stages of the administration. Can we talk politics, Gail?
Go ahead. It's your show.
Just for 1 minute, because this burns me up. Last week, I read about the Stonewall Historical National Monument. It's a National Park Service monument that I've been to, and it's located in New York City in Greenwich Village, right across from the Stonewall Tavern, which was the site of one of the greatest uprisings in what we call modern gay rights history, or LGBTQ history. Happened in over a series of nights, June 28th in 1969. My book was really about this. But here's what they did in the most recent iteration of cleansing our language. The National Park Service website, if you look at the website for the Stonewall National Monument, it used to be called the LGBTQ National History Monument. Get this, it's now the LGB.
Really?
They just happened to leave off two of the letters. So what that says to me is there's this beginning of trying to meddle with our historical presence of our trans and queer historical elders. And we all know that some of them were the leaders in the fight at the Stonewall that night. I just offer that as one example of how we are beginning to see the erosion of so many great gains that we've made in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Is same-sex relationships the core of your practice?
Not at all. No. It's such a small part of the population. Yeah, I'll talk to anybody. I'll talk to people on the street. I talk to people in the supermarket. I mostly talk to people who identify as heterosexual, people who are looking for relationships. And I do classes, Gail. That's my clients. I go to senior centers or councils on aging. I go to assisted living communities, independent living communities. And once in a while, I go to nursing homes. Not too much. I don't get invited that often, but I used to have to work hard to get invited to these places. Now I've got too many people asking me to speak. I don't have enough time. And that's kind of exciting too. So that the things have changed, I think. And I will literally set up 2 chairs at the end of the back of the room. I do a talk for 30, 40, 50 people, whoever comes. And then at the end of the talk, I always say, I'm going to set up 2 chairs back here in the corner. That's my office. When everybody is filing out, I'm going to go sit there. And if you have a question you didn't want to ask in front of the other folks in the room, they might be your neighbors or your friends, or they might be people who are big gossips, come talk to me. And there's always a line out the door because people have lots of questions. My friends who are sex educators with young people say they can't get them to ask enough questions. They have to cajole them into asking questions. But for older adults, people are very, very rarely too shy to ask. Even people who have grown up in a religious tradition where perhaps sex was something you would never speak about.
So the common questions that you hear.
Well, let's see. From the women, a lot of questions about dryness, issues of pain, I hear a lot of discussion about vaginal pain. So on the physical level, I hear a lot of questions, particularly from women, about that. When the men are online, they're asking me about penis issues or erections, particularly. I don't use the term erectile dysfunction anymore. I feel like it's way too clinical for me. I like to talk about erection differences. I talk about something called soft sex, and there's a soft cock week now, and there's a lot of my education for men is about trying to teach them that it's not about performance, it's not about being hard, it's not about orgasm, it's really about intimacy and connection. And that's a big, those are a lot of my questions for men. But some of the questions I get from women are very interesting, Catherine. Sometimes, one time I was really amazed. This woman came over to me. She says, "What's an orgasm?" I'm not sure I've ever had one. So it was great. We sat down and we talked, and I explained what the physiology was, and I explained what the emotional stuff was, and I explained what the hormonal levels were. And she was like, at the end, she said, "Well, I think maybe I have had one of those," because she was thinking Masters and Johnson, go up to the mountain top and come back down. And I said, sometimes it's just a little flurry, like, kind of a little buzz. And she said, "I think I have had that." So I get these amazing questions from people. I also get questions about power. And that's quite interesting too, about trauma, about unsatisfying sex, and what do I do about that? And he wants me to have sex more than I want to, and he takes Viagra too often, and he's pushing me, and it's very painful to hear that kind of stuff. And I always thank those women for trusting me, and I give them lots of resources, and I often give them ideas of where they can go for support and help. And I'm not a clinician, right? I'm just there to provide them with educational resources, but I really feel very, very big responsibility to make sure that I give people good resources to go get clinical support if they need it.
So are you sending them to doctors? Who are you sending them to?
It depends. Catherine, there are feminist therapists in our area who are wonderful, who I love. Some of whom are older, and some of whom specialize in older women, which is great. Unfortunately, most of them have a very long waiting list, so that's hard. But I also send them, if it's of a sexual function nature, I send them to a good sex therapist. And only sex therapists that are certified. I've really come to find that there's a lot of people who are trained in couples work, marriage and family therapy, but they haven't really been given enough training in sex therapy. And so it's a little bit sticky for them. It's a harder topic for them. So I always send people to ASECT certified sex therapists. ASECT is the national organization that certified people like me in sex ed, but they also certify sex therapists. And it's a pretty rigorous multi-year process with a lot of clinical supervision, etc. So I want to say that sometimes I send them to a urologist. Sometimes I send them to an OBGYN. It really is determined by what's going on.
Mm-hmm. You have a podcast, right? Your better half, our better half.
Hey, wait a minute. It's our better half. It's all of us, Gail.
And I think it was on one of those episodes that I heard you say that older people have all the wisdom and younger people have all the power.
I said that in my TED Talk. Yeah. Yeah, I get to be polemical in the TED Talk. I want to do another TED Talk, but I'm not sure I'll be able to memorize it as well anymore. But I like the style of a TED Talk. You can be more polemical. So what I meant by that, Gail, is that I'm not a big fan of this idea that we treat older adults, as particularly older women, as if we are over the hill or out of it. I'm constantly explaining to younger people what ageism is. They've learned, and they've been talking about sexism for years and racism for years, but they don't really understand ageism. And what's funny about ageism, you both know this, is that it affects both young and old, right? If you're younger than the age of majority, or if you're over 40, 50, 60, whatever the age is that you're feeling it, you're going to face discrimination. And so in my field, Gail, around sex education, I've adopted this term that was developed by two Israeli researchers, Teret Gewurtz-Meidan and Liat Ayalon. I can send you their article. It's a beautiful article where they coined this term, sexual ageism. Actually, they didn't coin it. Somebody else talked about it like 25 years ago, but nobody else picked it up. But in this article, Teret and Liat really speak to this idea that if we can't imagine older adults, particularly older women, being sexual beings, what does that say about ourselves? What does it say about who we, as in younger people, are, who have the power to make public policy and to determine curriculum and determine what is happening in our institutions of learning?
In terms of gerontology programs or women and gender studies programs, do you see this in the curricula? Do you see this topic?
Yes, sometimes, not very often. It depends on the faculty member, and it's going to get more tough, Catherine, because the National Science Foundation has just put out those words you can't use in grant applications, things like diversity, equity, inclusion, and the word women. Thank you. Just when we thought that women were getting a little bit better research being done around menopause, Kevin, you know this from the work that you've done. I'm so happy that you sent me your books. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your scholarship because we were just beginning to turn the corner on seeing menopause as an identifiable research topic. And now we're going to see a squelching and a real squandering of funds away from the areas of women's health. And so I think it's really dependent upon the bravery and the courage of the faculty members at this point.
Good point.
Right. So,
She's speechless.
So much wisdom, Jane, and we're happy that you're sharing it with our listeners. And so you, if I hear you correctly, you're looking at the future as not very positive for continued research in this area.
Well, for sure not. I mean, you have to remember who you're talking to, Gail. I am the greatest optimist besides maybe the professor in Candide. I mean, I will keep hope alive beyond anyone. And I think that while we won't be able to get research dollars, we're going to have a tremendous uprising against this. Reproductive justice is at the forefront of many people's minds. And I think that reproductive justice includes sexual justice. And I talk about this idea of sexual justice. So, Gail, I think you're right that research dollars are going to be shifted away. We're going to see many more dollars focused on the shapes of rocket ships. But we are going to see a lot more people writing and talking and calling their congresspeople and maybe demonstrating and going to rallies because we want to make sure that people don't forget that women, and particularly older women, still exist. I'm concerned lately about these companies that have kind of on their own taken away their DEI policies, their diversity, equity, inclusion policies, without anyone even asking them. They've sort of, bowed, right? And I call this anticipatory capitulation. This is what they want us to do. They want us to topple before they even have to do anything because it's so much easier for them, right? Well, I'm of the nature that I for instance, I'm an old lesbian. I've been a lesbian for 100 years, not really 100 years. I'm only 70, but about 50 years. And my sweetheart and I are going to be traveling to some red states this year because I have some big conferences I've been invited to. And you know what my promise is, Gail? We're going to kiss as much as we can in red states this year because 2025 is a turning point. And I want to proclaim that sexual side of me. I want to proclaim the juicy, excited, loving, intimate side of me as much as possible and be audacious and bodacious as much as I can, because that's what these times require. Not to capitulate, not to lay down and fall at our, at our oligarchs, but to really stand up stronger, put our shoulders back and say, we are who we are.
May need to start a fund for get out of jail, but that's okay.
I know. Catherine, good point. I'm going to try to be careful also. We have a joke in our family when people look at the two of us, sometimes they think we're sisters. And so the joke was that I would always take that opportunity to say, no, actually, we're married and here's, our story. And my partner would elbow me and say, shh, we don't know where we are. Well, now she's not allowed to do that because I'm going to say it. And I'm sure we may get into trouble, but I'm not worried yet. I'm banking on the fact that my white skin and my middle class educated side of me is going to keep me out of jail a little bit longer. We hope.
Curious. You've been lesbian, as you said, 100 years or so, and you got your PhD at age 62 in human sexuality. So what led you into this area of study and research and advocacy?
Prior to that, I had a 30-year career in the public sector. I was really devoted to my work as an educator in a very large psychiatric institution. We had 500 clients, patients. We had 1,500 people on staff. I was in charge of all the education for all 1,500 staff members. I had a big team. It was great. It was great work. It was really exciting work. We were changing the face of how mental health care was performed in our state. It was a big job and I was really excited. But I turned 55 and I was able to retire with a full pension. And I got out of town fast. But I wasn't really ready to stop. I wasn't ready to stop. You can see it in my eyes, right? I'm not ready to stop making trouble. I was just ready to stop doing that. That was a very important, really good work. I'm so proud of the contribution I made, particularly now when I'm seeing, federal employees under attack for being lazy or full of fraud or whatever those words are. We had some of the most incredibly brilliant and hardworking people on our team. But when I finished, I realized I wanted to make a little trouble. I wanted to do something that would give us a little more life in the world. And so I wanted to work in an area that had been a place of great conflict. And I'd been a feminist for a long time. I used to be a labor organizer. I had, many years of training as a organizational development consultant. When I was working for the state, I got people out of conflict a lot. I helped them deal with a lot of issues. And so I realized I can handle something. So what am I really interested in? And I realized the thing I was most interested in was taboo topics. And so what's more taboo than sexuality? And I wanted to test myself. I didn't really, this is going to sound strange, but I didn't believe I could do it. I thought that a PhD was for somebody who was someone else and more serious or more something. And so when I went back to school, I started the master's program in human sexuality, and did that for the 2 years it took me, and I thought, I don't know, maybe I'm not sure they'll allow me into the PhD. And they were so excited to have me in the PhD program, but I didn't know that I could do it. So when I finished that, it took me an extra year, but it was really worth it. I finished in 6 years. Took me the whole, let's say 50, yeah, took me 6 years. And, it was such a sense of accomplishment. It was such a fantastic feeling. And my kids were in college at that point, and they were like, "Really, Mom? You're going to school voluntarily? Like, that? Like, we think this is the end for us." So they were very proud of me. And when I got out, I asked them if they would call me Dr. Mom, and they both looked at me, and there were expletives thrown out that I probably don't want to say on your show, but they they were very sweet. Anyway, I wanted to study and get the PhD so that I could understand what research was really all about. I had never done any informed consent. I just had never done any kind of research that was of any substantial nature, and so I wanted to see if I could do it, and I wanted to see if I was smart enough. I didn't know that I was smart enough. I just didn't, and everything else I had done had come very easily to me. All the work I had done for 30 years, and so I thought, well, maybe I am smart. Maybe that's why I came easily. So when I finished, I forced myself to write my article, get it published, and then I went on to write my book, The Stonewall Generation, and it's done really well, and I'm really proud of it. And now I just wrote another book this year, so I'm just, well, it's a different kind of book, Catherine. It's a manual for clinicians who are working with adolescents, actually, adolescents who have created problem sexual behaviors somehow, and these clinicians have been asking me for years if there's anything about sexual wellness. So I'm transposing the work I've done with older adults to this population, and I'm using a lot of kind of really fun participatory activities that these clinicians can use. And the book will be out, I think, in the fall, so it'll be great.
Oh, okay. I know many people will be interested in this.
Yes, you'll have to let us know when it's published.
I'll be happy to send you both a copy.
Please.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. This is wonderful.
I don't want it to end, do you?
I don't know.
Want more? Yes.
What else can I talk to you? What else can I tell you about that would be helpful for your listeners?
Well, one of the things I'm listening to you and the work you're doing and all. I'm wondering why do older adults feel like they are problem children if they want to have sex or they want to be intimately involved, or, think that's so askance?
Yeah, I've had that experience. It's their middle-aged children that are really a problem, I think. It's not them. They're having a great time. Here's an example. A woman came to me one day and said, "I haven't used my vagina for sex in 10 years." I said, "Okay." She said, "I was taking care of my husband for 10 years, and I forget what it was. He had a chronic disease. And when he died," she said, "I made a pact to myself that I was going to not be done with my life. I was going to get my life back." And you've heard this story, right? That story about the caretaker the shifting power relationship, so that they're not parallel anymore. She's now taking care of him, or he's taking care of her. So in this case, she was taking care of him. And she said, "I met somebody and we've been kayaking a couple of times." I said, "Kayaking? That sounds so great." She goes, "Yeah, but I want to have sex with him, but I don't know if my vagina will work." So it was just a great question. So, and it speaks to what you're asking, Ellen. I said, "I don't know. We don't know yet. Just take it really slow. Not every sexual behavior has to do with penetration. So maybe don't try to have him penetrate you. You know what I mean? I was really trying to give her like some ideas for variables. And a couple of weeks later, she calls me up. She goes, "You're not going to believe it. It worked like a charm." I said, "Of course I'll believe it. I know you. You're amazing." So I think it's really more about how people perceive themselves. Harrison Orth did this great study. I'll send it to you in 2020. It was a meta-analysis of a huge, large number of participants, something like 14,000 participants over a large number of studies. And they found that there was a direct correlation between self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. So this woman didn't feel so good about herself. It wasn't just her vagina that she didn't feel so good about. She wasn't sure about her ability to actually have a relationship with a man that would be sexual. Your self-esteem is directly correlated to your sense of yourself in a relationship. And I would extrapolate that to sexual relationships as well, that you would include that as well. And I think what I'm trying to say here is how we see ourselves is really important, and how we love our bodies as we age is really important. And that has a direct effect and an impact on how we see our relationships. And so I was looking at the wall because my mom just died about 6 months ago. And she was great. She was amazing. Her name was Enid Fleishman. And if any of your listeners knew her, you'll know how great she was. She was in the New York area. And the thing about my mom was that she had a great attitude about herself. And she was no BS. She was who she was from when she was very young. And I hear a lot of women say, as I've gotten older, I can be more myself. I can be more honest, authentic, accurately me. Well, my mom has always been that way. And I remember we were filling out a census form for her. She was in her early 90s. And her hand shook a little bit. So she asked me if I would write it out for her. And I said, sure. So it was on paper and it had name. And the next question was age, put the age, and then it had sex. And she goes, sex? I haven't had sex in years. So, okay, Mom, they're actually asking for your gender. But she was so positive about it. And yet she was dealing with my dad, who had Parkinson's, and they've both passed since that time. And he had very little ability to physically satisfy her, but she found ways to do that herself. Yeah. I just read, and there's one more article I want to tell you about. I just read this article. I'm part of this journal club where we get to nerd out on journals once a month. We each present a journal article to each other. It's a lot of fun. And one of our members just presented this great article about masturbation across 4 countries around older adults. So we always think about men are masturbating, men are the masturbators, men are masturbating. But the truth is, not as many women in these 4 countries in this study were masturbating, but somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on the country. So I thought that was interesting. What's fascinating is that we think about masturbation as really just a manual technique. But for a lot of women, they're using vibrators. And I know that a lot of women over 70 are using vibrators because they come to my workshops and they ask me, what's the latest thing out? What can I use? My hand hurts if I have to hold onto too tight. Is there anything that's, good for someone with any kind of arthritis? You know what I'm saying? Like, people will ask me questions. So I know anecdotally that women are using tools to give them satisfaction. And I think that's really important for, I'm going to say, our listeners, Gail, because I feel like I'm part of your podcast now. So our listeners to hear that there's lots of wonderful toys out there that are being developed for women's hands who are older, and that they're being developed for people with pain and disabilities and maybe physical limitation, etc. So I think it's really kind of a hopeful era right now that the sex toy companies have discovered older bodies. Yes, it's capitalism, but hey, it's good for us. So that's all right for me.
I'm just really pleased you brought that up because we're thinking about women, people as sexual beings. Then we don't necessarily have to rely on a partner and for our own sexual. I like your term wellness, sexual wellness, and that doesn't get enough attention, I think, as that really needs to. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I talk about solo sex. That's an
Solo
easier
sex.
word. It's an easier word than masturbation for some religious folks. That's a scary word you can't use. But solo sex is really satisfying. No one ever has a headache. You can't get a sexually transmitted infection. You know, there's a lot of goodness to it.
You can go to sleep if you want. You can stay up if you want.
Sure, it helps with rest. Right, exactly.
Well, I think you're doing fabulous work.
Oh, thank you, Gail.
This field, and good luck as you continue on, Jane. We're lucky to have someone like you, subject, talking about these things.
Great to have you back. Thank you. And listeners, we'd like to see more of you at our monthly programs. Our online programs make your voice heard as together we change the conversation about women aging. Visit Aging Reimagined Circle at womenover70.com. And another podcast you might enjoy is Fit Strong Women Over 50. Jill McCausland and Chris Brown interview experts and share motivational stories about getting fit, eating healthy, strength training, running, and staying motivated.